Christian Horner fired from Red Bull. But do you know the real reason why? Do you think it's because of poor performance? Do you think it's because Max Verstappen didn't want him to stay? If that's what you believe, let me tell you, you're completely wrong. The real reason is that Christian Horner is about to sign a massive deal with Ferrari, and it will be officially announced in the coming days. I strongly recommend you stay until the end of this video, but only if you want to know all the details about Christian Horner's new contract with Ferrari. Christian Horner's silent departure shattered the illusion of unity that had long surrounded Red Bull Racing's leadership. Behind the glossy veneer of podium celebrations and championship parades, a tempest had been brewing, one driven not by performance or politics alone, but by a profound betrayal that struck at the very foundation of trust within the organization. What the public didn't see, and what only a handful of insiders ever knew, was how close Red Bull had come to collapsing under the weight of internal espionage, boardroom paranoia, and a clash of egos that had long been hidden behind carefully crafted PR narratives. As news of his clandestine visit to Maranello began to ripple through the corridors of Milton Keynes, shock quickly gave way to fury. For the core leadership, figures who had stood shoulder to shoulder with Horner through every title fight, every controversy, every media storm, the revelation was not just professional treason. It was personal. The level of deception wasn't casual, it was systemic. In the weeks leading up to his discovery, Horner had allegedly used burner phones, encrypted messaging apps, and even third-party intermediaries to arrange confidential meetings. Each step of the journey had been meticulously planned to avoid detection, from flying out of obscure private terminals in regional airports to ensuring his meetings at Ferrari never appeared on any calendar or itinerary. The degree of care taken spoke volumes. This wasn't opportunism. This was orchestration. Executives at Red Bull poured through flight records, subpoenaed financial transactions, and initiated a shadow investigation to trace the full extent of his actions. What they uncovered went far beyond a simple job offer. There were discussions about personnel movement, intellectual property, proprietary engineering concepts, and even the defection of two high-ranking strategy analysts who had quietly resigned the same week Horner returned from Italy. At Ferrari, the mood was triumphant but guarded. Their long-held desire to reclaim dominance in Formula One had taken a radical new form, and Horner's potential arrival was seen not just as a strategic coup, but as a psychological one. For years, Ferrari had battled Red Bull on track, suffering humiliating losses that eroded morale within Maranello's historic walls. Poaching the man who had architected so much of Red Bull's modern legacy would be more than just revenge, it would be redemption. Yet, even within Ferrari, not everyone welcomed the move. Some traditionalists viewed Horner as an outsider, a disruptor who would trample over Ferrari's deeply rooted culture. Others feared the backlash, the legal complications, the reputational risks. But the upper echelon, those truly in charge, had already decided. The checkbooks were opened. The NDAs were signed. The red carpet, metaphorically and literally, was being laid out. Back at Red Bull, the fallout was seismic. The internal power structure imploded almost overnight. What followed was not just a dismissal, it was a purge. Several senior figures aligned with Horner were asked to resign or were reassigned to roles with diminished influence. Engineers found their access revoked. Confidential files were audited. Phone logs were scrutinized. Red Bull's legal team worked in tandem with cybersecurity specialists to assess any potential data breaches, while the PR department scrambled to contain the narrative before it could explode onto the public stage. But containment proved impossible. Word had already reached rival teams. Paddock insiders were buzzing. Sponsors began asking questions. And within days, whispers turned into headlines. The paddock, once again, became a theater of whispers. Some claimed Horner had grown disillusioned with the direction of Red Bull's post-Dietrich Mateschitz era. Others speculated it was revenge for recent power struggles with Helmut Marko and the Austrian ownership faction. But the real story was messier darker, and still unfolding. In high-level meetings, Red Bull's remaining leadership debated not just legal retaliation, but whether to erase Horner's legacy entirely, removing his name from official histories, revising team credits, re-editing promotional footage. What had once been admiration had mutated into a vendetta. The betrayal was too deep. The wounds too fresh. Ferrari, meanwhile, played the long game. As leaks surfaced, they neither confirmed nor denied Horner's involvement. Behind closed doors, however, preparations accelerated. Legal advisors negotiated non-compete clauses, timeline buyouts, and image rights. Communications teams began drafting future press releases with vague wording, just in case. Private rehearsals were held for how to respond should the media storm break early. Every move was calculated. Every risk measured. Because Ferrari knew what was coming, they weren't just acquiring a team principal. They were detonating a bomb in the heart of their greatest rival, and the aftershocks would reshape Formula One's power map for years to come. In the days that followed, Christian Horner vanished from public life. No interviews. No sightings. No statements. Some said he had retreated to a secluded estate in the south of France. Others believed he was in negotiations with Liberty Media, trying to secure a broader role within the sport itself. But wherever he was, one thing was certain: he wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Because for men like Horner, silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And the game he's playing now is bigger than anything that came before. The energy in the room was unlike anything Ferrari had experienced in decades. Not since the era of Schumacher had such a seismic internal shift been orchestrated with this level of secrecy, urgency, and intent. Christian Horner wasn't merely interviewing for a role. He was stepping into a vacuum of power that both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc were desperate to fill with someone who could restore order, discipline, and vision. What made the moment electrifying wasn't just the individuals present, but the sheer implication of their alliance. Leclerc didn't sit in that meeting as a passive observer. His silence was calculated, his nods precise. He wasn't just there to witness the changing of the guard, he was part of the coup. The downfall of Frédéric Vasseur had not been sudden. It had been creeping in quietly, manifesting in missed opportunities, strategic blunders, and a growing sense of instability that Hamilton could no longer ignore. The tension between driver and principal had grown into something more corrosive, more personal. Leclerc, a product of Ferrari's system, had grown weary too. The romanticism of being Ferrari's golden boy had worn thin under the weight of broken promises. And Hamilton, a legend with 7 titles, hadn't moved to Maranello to waste his final years in confusion and chaos. He had come for legacy. For precision. For control. Christian Horner's presence shifted the gravitational pull inside Ferrari's headquarters. He brought with him not only the aura of Red Bull's success, but the scars of internal war and survival. The scandal that nearly tore him from Red Bull had forged a hardened, sharper operator, one that Hamilton, in particular, saw as battle-tested. The fact that the Agnelli representative didn't speak a word during the entire exchange only reinforced the magnitude of what was being decided. This wasn't a hiring, it was an anointing. A quiet transfer of power driven not by boardrooms, but by those who would actually be on track, risking everything. Hamilton's voice didn't shake. It was steady, unwavering, full of decades of earned authority. Leclerc didn't interrupt, not once. He allowed Hamilton to speak because he understood the symbolism. If Hamilton was convinced, if Hamilton pledged his trust, the entire internal culture would shift with him. That was the magnitude of his influence. But he wanted guarantees. Not marketing slogans or long-term visions. He wanted allegiance. Clear lines. A power structure that wouldn't crumble under the next failed strategy call or pit stop error. Horner didn't respond immediately. He looked at both drivers in turn, measuring the weight of the moment. His answer wouldn't just decide his future, it would determine the next decade of Ferrari history. And he knew it. Finally, he leaned forward, placing both hands on the polished mahogany table. Lewis, Charles. I didn't come here to guess. I came here to win. If I take this role, there are no experiments. There's a mission. You'll have structure. You'll have protection. And yes, you'll have answers. Lewis, if I'm in, you're not just number one, you're the reason we win. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. A shift had occurred. Something tectonic. Hamilton nodded once, slowly, absorbing every word. He wasn't looking for flattery, he was assessing conviction. Leclerc's eyes didn't drift. He stayed locked on Horner, his body still, but his mind racing. This wasn't a betrayal of Ferrari tradition, it was a resurrection of it. A rebellion from within, led not by managers, but by the gladiators themselves. What happened in that room would never be fully disclosed. There would be no official record of the conversation, no press release, no photographs. Just 3 men, each carrying the burden of failure and the hunger for redemption. And in that silence, something unspoken but deeply understood passed between them, a pact. Not just to win races, but to reconstruct Ferrari from the inside out. For Hamilton, this was more than strategy. It was vengeance against the mediocrity he had been forced to tolerate. For Leclerc, it was salvation from a dream that had turned into a slow-motion disappointment. And for Horner, it was the ultimate challenge, to conquer not only a new team but the myths and politics that had shackled it for decades. As the meeting concluded, no one stood abruptly. There was no urgency, just understanding. The drivers left first, side by side, not saying a word, because nothing else needed to be said. They were aligned. Horner remained seated, staring out at the Ferrari crest engraved on the opposite wall. He knew what was coming. The battles, the resistance, the scrutiny. But he also knew something else. The two most influential drivers on the grid had chosen him. And that, in the world of Formula One, is power that no contract can truly quantify. This was not just the start of a new chapter. It was the rewriting of the entire book. The tension in the room was electric, thick enough to be felt in the silence that followed Horner's words. Lewis Hamilton didn't blink. His eyes stayed locked on Horner, scanning for hesitation, doubt, or the tiniest flicker of insincerity. But there was none. Christian Horner's voice had the steady gravity of someone who had already made the decision long ago, someone who wasn't seeking approval but delivering a verdict. There was no mistaking the weight of his declaration. This wasn't just a gesture of leadership, it was a revolution cloaked in calm resolve. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Engineers, executives, longtime Ferrari staff, all stood still, mentally processing what had just unfolded. For years, Ferrari had been defined by internal struggle, political undercurrents, divided leadership, and fragile alliances. Yet here, in one sharp moment, Horner sliced through all that noise with a single irreversible proclamation. No more infighting. No more divided loyalties. Hamilton wasn't just another superstar signing. He was the cornerstone, the foundation, the axis around which the entire project would now revolve. And Charles Leclerc, standing quietly to the side, wasn't blindsided. There was no dramatic outburst, no subtle defiance in his body language. He took it in with the calm acceptance of someone who had anticipated this precise outcome, not as a betrayal, but as an inevitability. In that stillness, he revealed more maturity than any podium finish ever could. His brief nod wasn't just acknowledgement, it was silent agreement, a signal that he understood the stakes, the opportunity, and the deeper strategy being laid out in real time. It wasn't surrender, it was alignment. The old Charles might have fought this. He might have tried to assert himself, to push back, to stake his claim on a team he'd given everything to. But this version of Leclerc was different. He had endured heartbreak, political chaos, and seasons of unfulfilled promise. He had grown through pain, through near misses and team strategy blunders. Now, faced with a legend walking through the door under the full endorsement of a new team principal, Charles didn't crumble. He evolved. Because deep down, Leclerc knows that winning a championship takes more than talent. It takes timing, support, and a system that works seamlessly. With Horner in charge and Hamilton in the lead, the system could finally click. And maybe, just maybe, in that system, Charles would find the consistency, the pressure relief, and the structural backing to become something greater than a number one driver, a lethal number two. And for Lewis, the message couldn't have been clearer. No more shadows. No more cryptic messages from the pit wall. No more being second-guessed. This was not Mercedes, where internal power balances sometimes felt like navigating a chess match with invisible hands. This was a fresh empire, a new order being forged in red, and he was being handed the keys. Horner's decision wasn't merely symbolic, it was operational. Every department, from aerodynamics to pit strategy to simulator development, would pivot around Lewis. Data flow, upgrade schedules, testing priorities, everything would be synchronized to maximize his performance. Horner was not here to play the long game of pleasing everyone. He was here to win now. And Hamilton, with his unmatched experience and relentless drive, was the spearhead. Some would whisper that this arrangement was fragile, that Leclerc might eventually chafe under the weight of supporting another man's glory run. But those closest to the inner circle knew better. This wasn't about ego management, it was about unlocking potential that had been dormant. Leclerc had the raw pace. Hamilton had the legacy. Together, they could become something no other team could replicate, a symphony of speed and intelligence, of youth and experience, conducted by one of the most cunning strategists in modern Formula One history. And in that quiet, heavy moment, the room didn't just hear Horner's words. They felt the direction of the future shifting. Not through drama, not through conflict, but through clarity, through conviction. The message to the paddock was simple. Ferrari was no longer searching for answers. They had found them. The meeting stretched far beyond its scheduled time, evolving into a high-stakes, high-pressure strategy session where nothing was off the table. Every participant, from engineers to executive advisors, remained locked in their seats, eyes flicking between datasheets and simulations, but all ears were ultimately tuned to Lewis Hamilton. He had taken the floor not just as a driver, but as a visionary architect of Ferrari's potential renaissance. Speaking with a clarity that was both unnerving and inspiring, he proposed dismantling the traditional weekend operations entirely, dismantling decades of ingrained systems and rituals that had defined Ferrari's approach to race execution. He pushed for a top-down overhaul of the decision-making hierarchy on the pit wall, advocating for agile, cross-functional command nodes that could process information and make micro-adjustments in real time, eliminating lags that had cost Ferrari dearly in critical moments this season. Hamilton's blueprint wasn't theoretical. It was forged from years of battle experience, shaped by championship wins and bitter losses. He referenced Red Bull's seamless integration of telemetry, analytics, and command, but he layered it with the unique ethos of Ferrari: the passion, the history, the loyalty to heritage. What he was offering wasn't a copy-paste model. It was a reimagining, a fusion of Red Bull's ruthless efficiency and Ferrari's romantic legacy. Christian Horner, arms crossed but clearly intrigued, broke his silence with a nod of conviction. "That's the kind of system that wins back-to-back titles," he said with quiet intensity. "And that's what we're going to build here. No excuses." As the air in the room thickened with unspoken acknowledgments, it became clear that something irreversible had taken place. The structure of power inside Ferrari had subtly but unmistakably shifted. Fred Vasseur, still holding the title of team principal, found himself marginalized in real time. His input during the latter stages of the meeting was met with polite nods but no follow-up. The gravitational pull had moved away from him. Influence had changed hands. No official announcement was needed. Everyone in that room recognized that the balance of authority had tilted dramatically. Plans were already being mapped out in layered timelines. The restructuring would roll out in waves, strategically timed to coincide with the summer break, minimizing disruption but maximizing momentum. The first wave would target key personnel rotations, especially in areas where internal resistance had historically stalled innovation. Department heads were informed that all roles would be under review. Hamilton's involvement would go beyond just feedback. He would act as a strategic advisor, participating directly in the selection and reorganization of staff. Meanwhile, legal teams, previously in standby mode, were activated to begin drafting complex transition clauses, confidentiality agreements, and internal reshuffle protocols. The language used in those documents was cautious but revealing. Phrases like adaptive leadership redistribution and strategic collaborative initiative masked what was essentially a silent but decisive coup. Consultants from media and communications firms were summoned by encrypted calls, briefed in hushed tones about a narrative campaign that would need to be both bold and believable. The mission was to paint the restructuring not as a fracture or takeover, but as a proactive pivot into a new competitive era. Headlines were already being tested. Ferrari reinvents for the future. A new chapter begins. Legacy meets precision. Every corridor inside Maranello would soon buzz with rumors, but the inner circle had been sealed. What had started as a meeting had become a milestone, perhaps the most significant behind-the-scenes shift since the days of Jean Todt. It wasn't just about operational systems. It was about identity. Hamilton wasn't merely proposing to make Ferrari faster. He was offering to make it formidable again. The atmosphere that evening was electric but solemn. Everyone understood the magnitude. There was no cheering, no champagne. Just the weight of transformation sinking in. Christian Horner, before leaving the room, locked eyes with Hamilton and gave a subtle nod, half gratitude, half declaration of alliance. Hamilton responded with a barest smirk, not out of arrogance but because he knew what they had just started. This wasn't just about 2025. It was about rewriting the next decade. Not in press releases. Not in marketing decks. But on the track, in tire compounds, in pit lane chaos, in split-second calls. The revolution had no name yet, but everyone in that room was already living it. Back at Red Bull's headquarters in Milton Keynes, The atmosphere shifted in an instant from sharp precision to uncontrollable turmoil. The news of Christian Horner's discreet meeting, shrouded in secrecy and interpreted as an ultimate betrayal, landed like a missile inside the executive corridors. Panic didn't merely ripple through the upper echelons of management, it tore through them with the force of an explosion. There were no warnings, no gentle conversations, and absolutely no room left for Horner to defend his actions. His long-standing contract, once considered unshakable, was ripped apart with cold efficiency. Within minutes, security personnel were instructed to strip him of all access. Identification badges were deactivated. Gate codes were changed. Personal files were boxed up without ceremony. His corporate email account was disabled mid-thread. Communication channels fell silent, and so did the man who had once defined the voice and strategy of Red Bull racing. There was no farewell, no final address to the team, not even a closed-door meeting. Horner didn't make the walk of shame through the paddock. He didn't return at all. To those still clinging to fragments of loyalty, the message was clear: he was no longer part of the empire he helped build. In a single afternoon, a legacy was scorched to the ground. The man who had overseen 4 consecutive world championships with Sebastian Vettel, who had danced on the edge of genius and controversy with Max Verstappen, who had embodied the DNA of Red Bull racing since its inception, was erased without a trace. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. But the motorsport world was anything but quiet. Behind closed doors, chaos bled into panic. Helmut Marko, the ever-watchful architect of the Red Bull driver machine, reportedly erupted into a rage not seen in years. Some insiders described him as pacing with clenched fists, shouting in German, demanding a complete overhaul of the organizational pyramid. The equilibrium that had made Red Bull an unstoppable force, calculated, precise, deadly fast, was now under siege. Staffers were summoned to emergency meetings with no agenda. Strategy decks were rewritten overnight. Junior engineers whispered in corridors about internal power vacuums. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was there a coup? Had Horner been planning this for months? Who knew, and who had helped him? And then there was Max Verstappen. The reigning world champion, the center of Red Bull's current dominance, had not been consulted prior to the decision. By the time he was informed, it was over. Sources close to him, those rare few who can read beyond his guarded exterior, described him as shaken, unusually quiet, even angry. Verstappen is not a man who shows vulnerability in public, but he knows the weight of stability. And losing Horner, especially in such a brutal and abrupt fashion, had destabilized a structure that had delivered him to the top of the motorsport world. The timing couldn't have been worse. With rivals closing the performance gap, the last thing Red Bull needed was an internal implosion. And yet, the implosion had come, and the aftershocks were only beginning. Meanwhile, Christian Horner has gone dark. No press releases, no interviews, not even a cryptic tweet. His phone remains off. Associates decline to comment. Photographers have staked out his countryside residence to no avail. But silence is not the same as surrender. Those familiar with his relentless ambition insist that he's not hiding, he's recalibrating. Preparing. Because what Horner is about to do next isn't simply a career pivot. It's a power move that could redefine the landscape of Formula One entirely. In the shadows, behind layers of confidentiality and coded meetings, he is said to be engineering a return, one not as a mere team principal, but as the leader of a rival poised to ignite a war at the very heart of the paddock. This isn't just a personnel shift. It's a tectonic fracture in the structure of Formula One. And as insiders scramble for information and teams reassess their alliances, one truth hangs over the sport like an ominous cloud. Christian Horner is no longer bound by loyalty to Red Bull. He is no longer constrained by internal politics. He is no longer playing defense. For the first time in decades, he is an unchained force. And if the rumors swirling through Monaco and Maranello are even half true, his next move will make Red Bull's dominance look like the prelude to a revolution. And still, as the engines quiet for just a moment, something deeper stirs beneath the surface. This isn't merely a transfer of personnel. It isn't simply about Hamilton changing teams, or Leclerc adapting to new realities, or Horner stepping away from the empire he helped build. No, this is the tectonic shift that redefines eras. For Lewis Hamilton, this decision is not a farewell tour. It's a calculated strike, a final mission designed to immortalize his legacy, not as a record holder, not even as the greatest of all time, but as the man who breathed fire into Ferrari and resurrected its soul from decades of frustration and political decay. This isn't about red over silver. It's about purpose over comfort. It's about destiny, not nostalgia. For Charles Leclerc, the pressure isn't just external anymore. It's in every breath he takes within Maranello's marble halls, every whispered conversation he isn't part of, every meeting where Horner's voice carries more weight than his own. Yet within this tension lies his crucible. The boy who once dreamed of emulating Schumacher now finds himself standing beside a man many believe is greater. But this isn't a defeat. This is his test. Can he rise beyond the media narratives, beyond the growing roar of doubt, beyond the shadow of a 7-time world champion reborn in red? Can he evolve into something more than a prodigy, a leader, a fighter, a constructor of legacies rather than just lap times? This is the furnace that will either shatter him or forge him into the icon Ferrari has been chasing since 2007. And at the center of the storm is Christian Horner. Not the affable media-savvy principal with a grin that hides daggers, but the strategist, the manipulator, the empire builder who watched Adrian Newey drift away, who saw the fractures form inside Red Bull before they became public knowledge. He didn't flee. He didn't surrender. He recalculated. Because Horner knows that greatness isn't about staying on top. It's about knowing when to burn the palace down and build a stronger one from the ashes. Ferrari didn't just acquire a team principal. They absorbed a war general. A man who's already drawing the maps, forging the alliances, and identifying the weaknesses in both Mercedes' sterile structure and Red Bull's ego-driven chaos. He didn't leave to escape. He left to conquer. Quietly. Thoroughly. Unforgivingly. This isn't the usual Paddock shake-up. This isn't a silly season. This is disruption. The kind that makes engineers lose sleep, that forces boardrooms to rethink, that sends shivers through even the most established dynasties. Because when Hamilton walked into Maranello, he didn't walk in alone. He brought with him the gravity of history and the expectation of miracles. And when Horner followed, he didn't just bring strategy. He brought a blueprint for domination, forged in the fires of Milton Keynes, refined through over a decade of psychological warfare and cutthroat diplomacy. Ferrari is no longer a nostalgic brand seeking redemption. Under this new trinity, Hamilton the icon, Leclerc the heir, Horner the architect, it is becoming something terrifyingly efficient. Something cold. Something formidable. Every glance from Leclerc during team briefings, every casual comment from Hamilton about car balance, every subtle nod from Horner on the pit wall, it all means more now. Because they're not here to fight each other. Not really. They're here to destroy the rest. And yet the opposition watches, frozen. Mercedes, clinging to old glories, hoping that raw data can compensate for lost magic. Red Bull, wounded by internal strife, wondering if Verstappen can continue carrying the weight of a fractured dynasty. Aston Martin, McLaren, Audi, they all see what's happening, and none can stop it. Not yet. Because this isn't an open battle. This is a silent takeover. A long game. The reshaping of the grid under the surface, where silence speaks louder than interviews and rumors carry the weight of manifestos. The war has already begun. It wasn't announced with fireworks or scandals. It started with subtle exits, quiet arrivals, cryptic social posts, and sidelong glances. It started with Horner's gaze across the paddock. With Hamilton's silence after the Abu Dhabi finale. With Leclerc's furrowed brows behind closed doors. The first shots weren't fired, they were whispered. And yet their impact is seismic. This is the sport not as entertainment, but as empire. As political theater. As chess played at 350 kilometers per hour, with millions at stake and legends on the line. And Ferrari is no longer interested in playing catch-up. It's here to rewrite the rulebook, to turn myth into machinery, passion into production, legacy into leadership. No one saw it coming in this shape. Not like this. Not with Horner in red. Not with Hamilton chasing an 8th world title in scarlet armor. Not with Leclerc forced to evolve or be eclipsed. But that's the nature of Formula One. It doesn't just change. It transforms. And those who don't adapt are already history.